Welcome, do-badders, back to Bad Boy Running Podcast. Hey, Paul, as well. If you haven't listened to Damo's previous interview, maybe even, we've probably done 2 by now, I'd have thought, and then maybe 3 or 4, including running shows. You should go listen to them all in advance, so you truly know the spirit of the man, because we love him dearly. But Damo's got a book out. We want to talk to him, and we could talk about the book as well. Sure, we'll take any chance to speak to Damo. No way!
You guys, thank you. Pleasure to be on.
I'm going to start with a pretty controversial topic. Straight off the bat. I truly believe I drink more tea than you do.
What would you say is your daily average? I mean, I was going to say let's not get competitive about it, but we are getting competitive about it.
There's 2 things. There's volume, but there's also what type of tea as well. So I think we've got to assess both of those.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose on quality, as I often do. But I'd say I drink probably on average 5 to 6 pints a day.
Pints?
Who measures in pints? Who measures in pints?
Well, that's my mug. That's my mug size. I've got a ceramic pint mug that I normally drink from. I'd say I get to probably my record's about 12 in a day. That was a very hungover day. But
you must be urinating like solidly throughout the day if that's the situation. What?
Well, I have to stop after about 3 or 4 o'clock, or else it does bite me in the night. So, what are you putting out there, Damo, as your marker?
Well, I feel like I've been slapped around the face with a sort of lukewarm tea bag a few times. When you said 5 or 6, I was like, yeah, hey, we're neck and neck here. But then you said the word pint, and yeah, my mugs are insufficient compared to your mugs. You've mugged me off there.
Oh, nice! No, I mean that's good.
It's what you have to remember though is that David gets them delivered by his interns. He has a like one of those things where he gets his interns just to go like I want 3 mugs of three pints of tea always on my desk at any one point, and I don't want it to ever fall below the highest level. So he has that additional support that you may not have, Damo. So we have to take that into account as well.
I don't have an intern currently. I'm going to start thinking about that. If you
need to up your game.
Apply here. Can you put a link in the show notes, please? Apply here. Video of you making tea. Nothing in it for you. There's obviously a very important question. I interviewed Nikki Spinks once recently about making tea, and had the horrifying revelation that she puts her milk in first. So I do need to check that with you. I don't really think it's a valid cup of tea if you put your milk in first.
No one puts milk in first.
I think it's absolutely the right thing to do if you've from a teapot, but
that
not.
Was her caveat.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, but not if you're putting the bag in.
I still think that's a bit of a wrong one, but it's more forgivable in those circumstances. If you've got one bag, then you need to sort of gauge, the strength of it and stuff, and so therefore the bag has to go in first, and then you judge how much milk to add afterwards.
Who uses a teapot? Like, have you ever tried to buy a teapot recently? It's so hard. Like, teapots are just very, very hard to source. As an item.
Do you think the rest of Europe have gone right?
All our teapots are French. That's the problem. We don't. we haven't discussed type of tea bag here either. So what type of tea are you going for? Like PG tips, or are you going for say Clipper, or are you going for Yorkshire? Like come on, we need to assess the quality.
Well, this is great, Jody. You've revealed also your deep knowledge of tea, and you haven't put a score down for your tea drinking, and I'd be curious.
Yeah,
to know.
True.
I drink
trumpers at the end.
No. I drink a huge amount of tea, but all my tea's caffeine free, so it's which is I'm very much
I do have a 2 o'clock
You're just like no, that's just not acceptable.
no, there's something valid. Yeah, I cut much after 2 o'clock, and I carry on talking a bit like I am now, so I have to be careful. So there might be a couple of decaps. No, that's a great question. I'm glad you mentioned Clipper. They are my number one. Partly they taste great, but also they are at risk of getting all serious and boring. They are more ethical in that they don't have plastic in their tea bags and they don't bleach their tea bags. So I like them, but Yorkshire tea would be my second favourite, although I think they bleach their tea bags, unfortunately.
Clipper's instant coffee is excellent as well. Like as an instant coffee.
He mentioned the C word there. Is it possible to
No, David, come on! You haven't revealed what type of tea you drink. I'm thinking we're gonna some dodgy builder's tea here. We're gonna.
No, I mean obviously I'm as sophisticated as Stephen Fry. I'm a Twinings man. Twinings Earl Grey. Mix it up with a bit of Lapsang Souchong smoky tea. You know, at the end of the day, if I want to just pep up the little flavour.
Pints of Lapsang Souchong. That is like is the most. That must be one smoky office that you have. One smoky, scented office. That is incredible.
It just covers up the fact that, you know, the cigars that I'm smoking, the millions that are rolling in from the poddy and caffeine bullet and all that, you know, it makes sense. It makes sense.
You've painted a picture that we kind of expected, I think, of what it's like at Caffeine Bullet Towers.
Well, there was a nice segue there when you were talking about the ecological profile of the Clipper tea bag, because that brings us on nicely to, I guess, why the fact we haven't seen you running abroad very much recently.
So Brexit.
Is this the serious? Is it Brexit?
Yeah, exactly. What you some kind of running racist or something? What's the issue?
Unfortunately, it is that I am a raving racist, and I don't like foreign. I should stop there.
Foreign trails.
Yeah, this is. I've got a serious book out, unfortunately, as I think you know, called "We Can't Run Away from This." I'm hoping the book in general isn't as preachy as the title.
Are the pages bleached?
I don't technically know that detail about the process, but it's interesting you mentioned that because Vertebrate Publishing made a lot of effort on my previous book, and even more effort with this to analyse, with external auditing from Our Carbon, they analysed every aspect of how they make books to try and make it as low greenhouse gas emitting as possible. I can't remember off the top of my head what they do with the paper, but it's all FSS certified. But they are putting a blog on their website, they showed me this week, explaining everything about that. So you can have a look, but I don't know exactly. But they care, and they're great.
I mean, the lowest amount is not to sell any, surely.
Well, that's true. Also, we should.
Have you been working on that from your end?
Well, I think we're fine, actually. I don't think this is going to sell very well. It's not very good. I think we'll be fine. Although, out of interest, producing a book is about the same as a pint of dairy milk. I don't know if you have dairy milk in your tea. That's another, because dairy milk's surprisingly, sorry, not dairy milk chocolate, for example, but a pint of normal dairy milk is about the same as producing a book. According to How Bad a Banana.
That's incredible. Because you think about all the process of a tree, and I'd just assume that it would be far more late. Well,
unfortunately, what you're underestimating possibly is milk, because again, don't want to get all too serious and preachy and boring, but after fossil fuels, the second most destructive industry on the planet is meat and dairy farming, and it's surprisingly like even milk is pretty bad, especially the water use and so on. But I'm trying to keep this relatively upbeat. I should also
tea.
There are climate change jokes.
Climate change jokes, it's a rich vein, isn't it, of comedy that hasn't been explored enough.
There aren't loads, but there are some.
Well, what would you say then?
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, what would you say? Because I've always known you to be fairly environmentally friendly, but what would you say are the big moments in your life where it's forced you to take change? Because you've made some decisions to do with your racing, to do with certain other things, and for some people it's a gradual process. For others, there needs to be a decision made at some point to take that step change. So what would you say were those moments?
Oh, I think it was seeing Extinction Rebellion protests in London in 2019. I think it was April, the ones I first spotted, and I kind of thought, oh, that's quite exciting. They seem a bit more worried about this stuff than I am. So I sort of went to their website and followed links and started reading up. And I must admit, my sister, who at the time was lived for several decades in Bristol. So that's, what people in Bristol do. My sister was involved. It's not all her. It wasn't all her, but she was involved.
Swampy.
Yes. The Guardian found Swampy recently. They did an interview with him. They found him. Lives in the Forest of Dean, I imagine. Yeah, there's an interview in the last year. They found Swampy. And he came back out for a protest or two. It was good, wasn't it? It was nice to know he was still around.
Amazing, yeah.
Where were we? Yeah, so I sort of followed up and started reading and realised, this stuff's really, really alarmingly urgent. And governments and corporations aren't doing enough. Scientists say we need to reduce global emissions by 45% this decade, and we're still going up. So something, and even an IPCC report says, there's a lack of political will and too much vested interests, which is mostly the fossil fuel companies. So, so I began to understand why people were on the streets being alarmed and demonstrating, and I started joining in with them. At the same time, I suppose I started thinking, well, could I do a bit better? At the time, if I'm honest, I was, flying around Europe doing races. I mean, one of the very simple things I've learned since then is I can still do most of those races in Europe. I can get a train to them. And that's often like a third of the footprint.
And actually, just going back, talk us through those demonstrations. Like, have you been attached to an ambulance on the M25, or like what were they like to be involved in?
And where were they? Because I know Extinction Rebellion has a very different flavour depending on where you are. Because I've experienced Extinction Rebellion protests in Brighton, which is a very middle class affair. Very, very different from other places. So it'd be interesting to see what the flavour is of it that you experience. Yeah,
they're a fascinating organisation because they've got this sort of decentralised structure. So it's sort of So I went to meetings in the Bath. No, that sounded wrong. The Bath branch of the city of Bath.
Reuse the water, I'd imagine.
Should have been a shower, really. That would have been. And Bath, they're pretty much autonomous. Like once these little groups are set up, they're pretty much autonomous and can sort of do what they want as long as they follow the sort of the main ethics. So it can feel quite different. And I don't agree with everything Extinction Rebellion have done, but I've only joined in. I've never joined in, if I'm honest, with a sort of direct action that is going to likely lead to arrest. I've joined in lots of big scale protests, and they've honestly been really infectious and optimistic and welcoming and accessible, and I've gone away feeling buoyant and happy and like there's hope and things like that. Dan Lawson, who's a record-breaking GB ultrarunner and co-founded Rerun Clothing, he's actually managed to get arrested. I failed. I did get told to get off a wall by a policeman, but I was a bit shocked at how I was a bit shocked at how meekly I just did what he said.
What was Dan arrested for then? Because I can imagine with him it could be for things in his pockets as much as.
As far as I know, it was the same group of protests, but we weren't together that day. I think he took the decision to sort of sit in the road and knew that if he didn't move, they would arrest him. I think at that time I was willing to sort of join in with that. I just didn't find the right protests. But he was arrested and they went to court and he had to pay a fine over time. And there are implications for an athlete. Actually, I think he can't go to America now.
Oh, really?
And he's a world-class athlete. He's been third at the European 24-hour championships. He's represents Great Britain numerous times. So there are implications for an athlete. I've thought about, sometimes I've been up for it. Sometimes I've thought, there are one or two things I want to do still. So I've joined those sorts of protests. That's been, I'd say totally positive and wonderful. Usually. Yeah, always actually. And there are some more coming up in a couple of weeks. There are some going on in London at the moment. I didn't make them I just wanted to be more family time. But in a week or two, there's more coming up, which I plan to be in London for. Where are we going with that?
So when you then decided that you needed to have almost a wholesale change of how you were operating, of how you thought, like what kind of things popped their head out as being big changes you could make?
Well, that's what has fascinated me for about 3 years now. From a running perspective, where are the areas that are causing problems? And I guess at first I didn't really know. Like, should I reduce should I start not using gels? In fact, this is kind of what I did. I won't use gels because they're in plastic, and plastic's bad. But I didn't know how bad plastic was compared to, I don't know, driving to the Lake District. I didn't know what was worse. Like, what if I drive to race in the Lake District but don't use any plastic in the race? Have I improved anything there or not? And I guess I was intrigued by all those little things. And I've read a ton of books. I've consulted with a company called Our Carbon, who analysed my whole family's kind of footprint. And yeah, I could see that the transport was, as a lot of people would guess now, was such a huge chunk of that. It is online at ourcarbon.com. And I haven't flown for 3 years now, but I haven't sort of pledged to never fly again, because there are, I've got to be honest, there are still 2 or 3 things I'd love to do. And I'm in a privileged position where I've done a lot of the big races I want to do. So I'm not looking down my nose at people who want to do Marathon des Sables or something like that. I've been very lucky. I've done the things, but I've realised I can do UTMB. I can get the train there. I did a race in Italy 2 or 3 weeks ago. 4 of us drove out, which is often about the same as getting a train, which is about as good as it gets. So sometimes it's, I've pretty much carried on as I was, just taking lower carbon decisions, I suppose. So travel's the number one thing. The other 2 things for athletes usually is going to be your fueling, and that's simply trying to cut down on meat and dairy. I suppose most of us aren't chomping on Big Macs in the middle of a race anyway. But I suppose where I saw it was almost that sort of that encouragement to, get in protein after a big effort, or a workout or a long run, which I used to do, which isn't, and no one's saying everyone has to go vegan, but if we can all cut down a bit. And the other stuff is our kit, actually, our clothing and our shoes. And actually that was the most depressing thing to look into. There's so much greenwash. There's so many companies saying, hey, there's a little bit of recycled plastic in the shoe, so it's sustainable. Or some of them going, oh, it's made from mushrooms and algae. But actually, if that shoe falls apart sooner than a shoe made of plastic, which they're all made of plastic, fossil fuels basically, and none of them are recycled. And they tell us to throw them out after 300 to 500 miles. So there's a huge loads of shoes. The waste issue is huge.
And do you get a sense of like what would a pair of the most fuel inefficient trainers, how would they scale up against a flight or against? Do you?
Oh yeah, so a pair of shoes on average is 14 kilograms of carbon dioxide, CO2 equivalent of greenhouse gas, 14 kilograms. So that's not loads in the scheme of things. A flight, like an average flight to like the middle of Europe, is going to be about 1.5 tons. So that's huge. Like it's huge. So shoes, shoes are pretty small in the grand scheme of things. But I don't know. I say it in the book, so I'll say it here. Like I counted up my shoes and I had 25 pairs. And that actually added up to a lot. That was, I've forgotten, I've put it in the book somewhere, but like the amount I could travel domestically, I think I could travel to Glasgow or something like that. Like it was the same emissions as, I can't quite remember, but maybe it was driving to Glasgow or something like that. So that was fairly significant. And then this is the fact that really stumped me actually, the trainer industry globally, and that's not just running shoes, that's all trainers. but it's roughly the same emissions as the United Kingdom. So that's how big that industry.
Oh, wow.
Nike are just absolutely epic, and Adidas are very, very big, and then there's sort of the rest. But yeah, the emissions from making trainers, and most of the emissions come from simply the production, making them in the first place, is about the same as the UK. I mean, yeah, an expert would pick that apart a bit and say, well, you know, sometimes international flights aren't included as part of the UK's thing, or the military either. But just as a ballpark figure, like that's that blew me away a bit. Like that's wow. So, and then a lot of us have more trainers than we need, and maybe throw them away when they're, you know, there's still a lot of use in them, which becomes part of the sort of waste crisis. So yeah, that was quite something for me to discover, I think. So yeah, so if you add all those shoes up, I suppose over time or a year or two, you'd go, oh, that's getting quite bad. And of course, all the companies, well, they're always pushing new shoes at us, of course. I mean, they're all trying to make money, but they're always telling us this shoe's better. You know, we've stopped making that old one. We've made a slightly different one. You should buy the slightly different one, or even just a different color. So they, you know, I think a lot of them could improve, you know, and stop that.
Because I know Killian, he's with his N and running, his whole thesis is if you make a really good pair of shoes, then that's almost the best thing we can do at the moment. But do you know enough about the alternative trainer market to know whether, you know, your Allbergs or there are alternatives genuinely out there that we can perform in that don't have as big an impact?
Yeah, I looked into it quite a lot, and it was really fascinating to discover these other brands like like Hilo and Icebug. And who are the ones that Barack Obama wears? I've forgotten. There's there are 4 or 5 brands anyway that have become really stylish and but are pretty ethical too. What you got to look for, I suppose, there's some brands saying, you know, using some better materials, but actually when you go on the website, do they have not just a sustainability policy, but have they analyzed their overall emissions, and do they have a plan to reduce them? And some companies have got that, including Nike and Adidas, who I would generally say are the baddies. They are, but with Nike especially, and again in the book, there are all sorts of loopholes they're managing to go through. So yeah, there are some small companies
stuff, don't they? And then not count.
Oh yeah. So what do you mean? What kind of loopholes? So, you know, for people who don't
for example, Nike were able to. So one of the schemes they joined, it said like as long as your profits, it was your emissions versus your profits, and their profits were going up. So effectively, their emissions were still shrinking compared to their profits, and so they could claim that their emissions were going down, even though they were growing. Even they were growing, but they weren't growing quite as big as their profits or something. So they were able to say, "Oh, we're reducing our emissions," but actually they're both growing, sort of thing. I think I've remembered that correctly, but yeah, I do put that in the book. So Nike, I think Nike are awful, and they're open about trying to double their business. So that is making lots and lots more shoes and clothes. And I appreciate, companies need to make money, and they apparently need to make more and more money each time. But that's bad for the planet. Ultimately, what underpins this is an overconsumption crisis, whether that's flying too much, making too much food. Because like within food, the next biggest thing after dairy and meat is waste, and 70% of the food waste. I am going to get quite boring soon, but you did ask. 70% of the food waste globally happens in our homes. Actually, it's not in the supermarkets because they don't want to lose that money, so they're quite efficient. Yeah. But in our homes, apparently 70% of food waste. So I forgot where I was going with all of that.
I think it's slightly higher if you have children. Yeah, that's the amount of food waste is insane.
It is tricky, and that's become the second biggest issue for food, more than packaging, is food waste is judged. But I've forgotten where I was going with that. But Nike, so really with kit, unfortunately, the unsexy message is we need to sort of buy less, make it last longer. Which might include so look for durable products that are going to last, are better than, hey, this is made of mushrooms. How do you
know a durable product though?
Well,
is that just customer reviews, or
I think it's, you know, asking your mates, or learning from experience. And there are always nuances here, because some of us can make a pair of shoes last well over 1,000 miles. I was chatting to a very good mountain runner late last week, you know, and he's a bigger guy, and he says, yeah, these shoes are done by 300 or 400 miles quite often. Whereas, yeah, I've got several pairs now that are well through 1,000, and I've heard people say 2,000.
Yeah, I've hit 2,000 with some.
So it can vary a lot on a person, maybe their weight, maybe their running style, where they're running. But yeah, definitely that 300 to 500 thing is a bit of a myth.
Is there like a reckoning to be had in terms of how cheap running has been in terms of buying kit and everything else? Because, like, you know, we did a promotion recently with SOAR, and you know, their kit's expensive, but you know, they spent a lot of money, a lot of time on trying to make it you know, as sustainable as possible. It's quite expensive kit, and so, you know, some people say, oh, it's ridiculous that it's this expensive, but other people have recognised, you know, that this is the cost of making something sustainable, the cost of, you know, producing it in the UK so that there's less distance to travel. You know, these different things. If we want to have to massively reduce the footprint and make sure that we have things that are more sustainable, in order for that business model to work for those businesses, they're not going to be able to sell, you know, 3 or 4 pairs every couple of years. But, you know, to encourage it, do we have to get used to more expensive shoes, more expensive kit, more expensive everything, in order to understand that? And how do we manage that transition? Because all of a sudden people are like, well, that's fine if you've got a lot of money, but all of a sudden running, it changes into something very different.
Yeah, that's a great question. The truth is, I don't know what the sort of the future is there. I mean, what that reminded me of is that sort of massive t-shirt problem that running has. You know, every sort of 10K, 5K, half marathon, here's a t-shirt, here's a t-shirt, here's a t-shirt, and then most was, yeah, I've got 2 or 3 race t-shirts that I care about that mean something, but I realized a while ago I had a drawer full of t-shirts that meant nothing to me. And they were cheaply produced, probably reasonably unethical. No idea if the workers are treated well, and there's definitely a problem there in running with the free stuff. And then we don't value it, do we, ourselves? Whereas if I've paid a lot of money for something, yeah, I'm going to look after it. I'm going to value it. I would say, I mean, shoes are pretty expensive. You know, they're nearly always over £100 now, and now they're 160, 180. And yet shoes are the things that wear out quickly. Like, none of my t-shirts have ever worn out. T-shirts, ironically, seem cheap but seem to last forever. And then it's the shoes that are expensive, but I suppose they're getting the abrasion on the tarmac. But yeah, that might be it. That might be it. That to pay for properly ethical things, because one of the big things in fashion is the supply chain, and brands not knowing, having no idea who's made the stuff. Because you get tier 1, 2, and 3 factories. So the tier 1 factory, they may well understand what's going on there, but then there's a tier 2 and tier 3 factories, and the brand will have no idea about those workers, how well they're paid, how well they're treated, you know, what chemicals and dyes and pesticides and things were going on, and that's a global problem with all of fashion. And yeah, to improve that, it takes a lot of work to know the supply chain and make it transparent. So that probably is going to come back on us, I guess. I mean, I imagine there'll always be some cheaper options. I hope for people as well. Yeah, you'd hate it if running became inaccessible.
But it's interesting about the supply chain, isn't it? Where, like, it's made out as though, like, the supply chain is this really opaque thing, as though we don't understand. You know, oh yeah, we don't know what happens at different points of the supply chain. But there are organisations that require you to have full visibility of the supply chain. Like, if you, for example, like, I know. If you want to be a participant at any of the COP, gatherings, you need to be completely transparent about what your supply chain is. You will not be able to participate. You will not be able to present. You will not be able to do anything like that unless you've got full visibility through this full supply chain. You have to produce a huge amount of documentation, which is probably a lot of paper, which is, again, probably not environmentally friendly. But there, for certain things, there is huge visibility. Is it just like a case of will? I think the thing that you spoke about there was about will, but it's in, like, Nike's interest. It's in their interest to like make out that this whole idea of the supply chain is this opaque thing that you that they kind of have no control over, whereas they can completely control if they wanted to.
Well, I mean, that's the same. The lack of will is the same accusation leveled at the politicians for not, cutting down fossil fuels. So it's, maybe it's, well, it probably isn't in their interest to spend the time and money doing that. So so it needs regulation, and that was one of the ongoing debates I found when I was looking into the sort of fashion and clothing. Was some people were for regulation, and to me it seems a no-brainer. You absolutely must have.
Who's against? Who is against regulation?
There's an expert. I've got a sustainability expert in there. I forget if the quote when made it into the book or not, because I had to cut some stuff out at the last minute because it was much too long. Because as you can tell, I get carried away. But there was a sustainability expert who thought it wasn't necessary, which to me sounded absurd. I can't remember his reasoning.
What was their logic behind that?
I must admit, I can't remember his reasoning. He was very, he works in the industry full time. He was quite supportive of the industry. I think he was someone who's got fed up of the industry being attacked, and he was quite keen to promote the good bits. He didn't think regulation would be helpful. I must admit, I've forgotten why. But to me, it absolutely. Sorry, you go on.
No, you get.
Well, just one final point was, what's really frustrating is you have, say in France, you have something called, I think it's called producer responsibility or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So basically, we have it in tech here. So you can take, if your I don't know, your laptop is broken and you've got a better one, and what do you do with your old one? You take it to Currys or PC World, and they apparently recycle it, or they look after it. Legally, they have to sort it out for you, or your old iPhone or any tech. And I've done that a few times. In fashion, there's none of that. In France, they brought it in and it created loads of jobs, and they had 60% return rate of clothing. So why shouldn't the people who create these things, and most of our clothing is made from fossil fuels, is plastic, polyester.
Yeah.
70% of the world's clothing is polyester, fossil fuels. Why shouldn't the people who make it, especially with the shoes, be responsible for looking after it afterwards and making sure it can be, returned, safely to the planet, or disposed of well, or recycled? So it seems madness to me that same law isn't brought into fashion globally, or at least in Britain. I find that pretty frustrating. I'll try and after the show I'll remember what it was called.
But is that the issue? Is the fact that a lot of these things need global solutions? Like, that element of France doing it will creates that from a regional perspective. But actually, unless there's a European wide movement towards that, or a more global movement towards that, it's not going to create a significant change.
I won't pretend to understand it enough to be able to answer that properly, but there was a government white paper called Fixing Fashion, which took place only the last 2 or 3 years. It's all online. It's called Fixing Fashion. And it goes through all of this, all the worst parts of fashion globally. And then it has all these recommendations at the end. And the government said no to all of them. So, you tell me, why do they keep saying no to all these things that, I don't know, that would be better for a livable planet? I find it baffling. And if you don't find it, I'll send you a link afterwards if you want. But it was, really upsetting. In fact, I hadn't realised they'd said no to it. And I was doing a lot of the writing based on, the government have been recommended to do this, and feeling quite hopeful. And then this sustainability guy said, the government has said no to all of this, don't you? It was like crushing. It was like, what? But they've seen all this harm. And in Asia, the harm is immense. The chemicals, the way people, there's still slave labor in the cotton industry, child labor. You've got me started. But it's quite depressing. It's quite depressing.
And how unique would you say, how different are these problems and these challenges for runners versus just a standard person? Would you say runners are better, worse, the full range?
Yeah, good question. I guess. I suppose if you look, the worst aspect of fashion is the sort of the fast fashion, the really cheap fashion. That's the worst aspect. In the running world, the most similar vein of that is the sort of free race T-shirts. I feel like Dan and Charlotte at Rerun Clothing have done a great job over the last couple of years of sort of banging on about that, hopefully enough that people are at least a bit more considered.
T's not trees as well.
Yeah, no, they're a great organisation that hopefully lots of race organisers know about. Give people the option to plant a tree instead. How good are runners? Well, it was really interesting. I mean, I end the book on hopefully on quite a positive note, in that I realised, I was getting quite down about my running, and then I thought actually there are lots of runners and brands and events doing really impressive things. And actually, I felt at the end, well, maybe running can actually lead the way in sports, and maybe even wider society. Actually, running has shown several impressive things, like the brand you mentioned. There are some other brands doing impressive things. There are optimistic things, but then sometimes I think this is just an awareness or education thing. But sometimes schemes have been set up, or say runners haven't responded all that positively to, say, the plastic bottle drinks being removed from some races. Sometimes that hasn't gone down well with sort of over half. There have been a few surveys and stuff. But I think sometimes that's simply awareness and maybe people not really realizing. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of runners. There's always going to be people at both ends of it. But overall, I felt quite encouraged about running. And I guess at the end, I remembered actually, ultimately, running is a good thing. Like, it was hard. I got so bored, sort of drilled. That's not the right word, is it? But went down so far into it that I got really depressed about running and my running. And then I did sort of come back up and go, actually, there's, let's not forget how much happiness, how many great things happen in running.
Why did it depress you about your running? What was the connection?
I suppose my contributions and I mean, here's a massive dilemma I have ongoing, is that I am sponsored by a brand, and I guess I'm often thinking, should I be, is that the right thing? I've got two friends, Dan Lawson and Jasmine Paris have both decided they're elite ultra runners. They've decided they don't want to be sponsored by a brand because they don't want to be sort of. So I think I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I think they're uncomfortable being a salesperson ultimately, and so am I.
But then, if you think that the products of the brands are more durable, then
what brand are you sponsored by?
Nike. No,
Nike.
Innovate.
Texaco.
Innovate. Who hopefully you know, but they're a sort of trail brand. Trail running brand based in the Lake District. I rationalise it, and I've got a few reasons why I think it's worthwhile me staying with them, but I'm not totally comfortable with it, and I feel some sort of guilt. I mean, and I've changed my behaviour a lot, especially online. Decided, for example, well, this is a shot you see often on social media: is, hey, I got some new kit from my sponsor. Look at my new kit, and I guess I decided I'm not going to do that. That's feeding people's desires to shop. Now, of course, we do need some shoes to run in, and probably one or two other items. So, I do believe to an extent in Innovate's approach, and durability is their thing. They don't do everything right, and there are ongoing conversations, and I've heard some encouraging things that I can't talk about publicly yet, but I believe they care enough. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing in my head, and it puts me in a sort of what's the word? I guess a hypocritical position. But I also think it's important to show a middle way. Like, it's not that helpful if everyone who cares about the environment has to, can't be sponsored, has to be vegan, can't ever fly again, because that's going to turn lots of people off, isn't it? We need the people in the middle, I suppose. And if you kind of say, if you care, then you have to do these three things, or you have to do all the extreme things. To me, that's not going to be super helpful. That's not going to get people on board. But of course, that fits with me being a sponsored athlete. So maybe I'm.
But how have those conversations gone, out of interest, especially given they've lost Jasmine, who's a pretty big name and has still got quite a lot of achievements still in her. She's someone you'd want to be as your sponsored athlete for at least another decade. Have they actually changed some of the clauses in your contract? Because previously were you having to post a certain amount of times, or have you had to really rework everything that's in there?
No. Well, it may surprise you. I don't care if they mind. I've never had a contract with them. It's always been very relaxed, based on sort of trust and mutual sort of understanding. And they've never been pushy with that. Certainly, I've heard other friends or elite sponsored runners, they're asked to post once a week or once a month or certain hashtags. I would say once or twice a year, Innovate say, look, this is a really important product for us. We're going to send you this shoe a month in advance so you can have a good try of it. The launch day is this. You don't have to, but we'd appreciate it if you could post something about it. The last time I did that was well over a year ago. They do have a shoe coming out that I've been using, which I think is reasonably impressive. I wore it in my last race, but I feel uncomfortable. I feel conflicted promoting it, but I do think it's a good shoe. But I think I haven't decided yet what I'll sort of do there. I guess it's the dilemma between, I don't want to be responsible for, how do I say this? I don't want to overplay my own importance, but I also don't want to be responsible for encouraging people to buy things they don't need. But at the same time, if a product, but then it's like if a product, I actually believe in it and it's been useful to me, is it okay to still do that? So I guess I'm sussing this stuff out as I go along, I suppose, and trying to find a middle way.
But there's something that actually comes up quite a lot, and I think David and I have talked about this a bit, and we've also talked about this with different do-badders as well. Is that I would like to hear your view on this. Is that what you do, and you have followers, and Jasmine has followers, and people, and they feel inspired by what you do, and they feel inspired by seeing you race, going to the big races, go and do that thing, and there's a whole a level of inspiration and awareness that you bring to ultra running, to trail running, that inspires people. It gets people motivated, gets people out there. And it brings that. And so they want to see you in big races as well. They want to see you doing these things. They want to see you challenging those things. And especially with someone like Jasmine, and now being restricted by being able to see them, it's almost it closes it a little bit for the fans. And I know that don't necessarily do things for fans or anything else, because it's all down to your personal conscience. But is there any element where you think about there's an element of possibly limiting what you're doing and the impact that's having on all those people that look to you and feel inspired by you, and they want you to do these things? And of course, you should never do it because of other people, but you have a position that other people don't have, and people look to you for that inspiration to do those big races. Do you ever feel the weight of that, or do you ever feel like I could be doing more, or anything like that at all?
Do you mean like? Well, for example, I just trying to make sure I understood what you mean. Like Jasmine Paris went out to do Barclay marathons this year, sort of thing. Is that like so? She's very.
But if she'd have quit before she'd done that, if she'd have said no to flights before she'd done that, like all the people that absolutely wanted to see that would feel like kind of denied. We've never got to see one of the best female ultra runners of our time doing that, and the fact that it was done in that order worked okay. But there may be other things that they people want to see. Like that's I think it's just the difficulty with being very public and a very renowned runner, is that kind of people expect you to go to like the big races, expect you to do those things, and kind of feel denied when you don't do those things. If that makes sense.
I think I get what you mean. Yes. No, that's good. I hadn't thought of that. I must admit. We still both went out to do UTMB. Like that's the biggest one on the planet, and we could get there without flying. We could get there fairly reasonably. I must admit, so there's a race called Diagonal de Fou. I don't know if you would have heard of it, but it's 100-miler. It's right out on Reunion Island, which is like the other side of India, and it's a 100-miler that sounds really exciting. And previously, I really wanted to do it, but I decided it would take 2 long flights. I've decided I can't ever do that, unless it's part of some epic family holiday, maybe. But I wrote that one off. But I don't know if that many people know that race anyway. So I've decided personally, like there are 2 or 3 things I want to do in America. If I can get into them or fit them into the plan, really the only logical thing is to fly. I'd feel bad about it, but I would still yeah, like in certain circumstances, probably only one a year, certainly. But yeah, I haven't ruled out flying altogether, but I've massively reduced my flying, so I'm okay with that, doing it occasionally. So I would say I've reduced a little bit, but not massively. I mean, I still went out and did, Tour de Gionne recently, which is a reasonably big race. So I don't think either of us are. I think we're both restricting ourselves a little, but not a lot. And yeah, Jasmine,
what about the Al Gore situation? Like, you know, because you are a very public face in terms of running, in terms of talking about these issues, and it's really important. And the more people you go to see, the more people. Well, no, but that's the thing, because that was the thing, wasn't it? Al Gore, with the talking about the his PowerPoint presentation on Inconvenient Truth, he took that globally. But of course, there was all the backlash, wasn't there, around the fact that he was taking jets to various places in order to spread the message. But there was a balance.
He lost the election. You didn't win UTMB. So that was the analogy
I was going for with that. But it's always like it's slightly different now because we did people from walks every. But it's like you now have a position of talking about these in terms of the running community, and people seeing you and things like that.
It seems a figurehead for it.
Exactly. And so there may be more travel involved. There may be seeing more people, and seeing people is much more inspiring than seeing them over Zoom, for example. So like, is there a balance to be made there? Would you think about that? I'm not trying to say, oh, go on Concorde to New York in order to speak to the UN, anything like that. But it's one of those weird like dichotomies of like you're talking on green issues and you're talking about these things, but it's almost like when you get put on this in this area where you have this like figurehead quality, it's like more people need to see you, more people want to see you, and invariably that increases the opportunities for more carbon footprint,
more travel and more emissions.
Exactly.
No, I do. Yeah, I do feel. I scrutinize myself more now. And I try. So I've done a lot more train travel. Whenever possible, I've substituted a car journey for a train. I've got more. Yeah, that's become normal there to sort of look at the train timetable and book a train. But yeah, I mean, for my training, I live in the Wiltshire Alps, which aren't as big as some other Alps. So I still go to the Brecon Beacons, not super regularly, but the only realistic way to go there and be back, and be back in time to see the kids is to drive there on my own. That doesn't happen every week or even every fortnight, but I feel really guilty when I do that now. But I mean, and yeah, I do offset it, but that's another debate, and that's quite frowned upon now within the sort of sustainability world. So I feel there's self-scrutiny and there's a feeling that I might be being scrutinized. I think there's got to be a level of realism where, I mean, yeah, I'm going up to the Kendal Mountain Festival, but when I'm up there, I'm doing like I'm presenting something on the Sunday, I'm giving a talk on sustainability, but I can almost definitely get the train up for that. And then I'm also doing like a book thing. So I'm doing three things. I'm traveling up to Lake District, but I'm doing three things over 3 days. So to me, that's perfectly reasonable to me. I mean, there'll always be a few people. There are a few keyboard commandos around.
And that's what I'm saying. That's saying it can't just be measured in carbon footprint. Like, you doing something like that has an impact that spreads out beyond that. That isn't as easily, that can be put into the, oh yeah, but you use this many kilograms of carbon in the process.
Yeah, there's a nice concept actually called the carbon shadow, and the way it was explained to me, there's an online, I can send you a link to the concept actually, but there was the idea of, hey, there's a guy who walks to work every day and walks home, and then there's a woman who lives next door, and she flies once a month. She flies around the world. Who's best for the environment? The guy who walks to the power station, the coal power station, and works there every day. The person who flies is a climate scientist, and she's flying and she's sharing her knowledge. Who is better for the environment, and of course she is. But her footprint is worse. But her carbon shadow is huge, and her ability to influence people with the right knowledge and change people's views or influence their behaviour. So yeah, the debate shouldn't be just on someone's footprint, but I know what my footprint is and I've reduced it massively. And yeah, I get called out on social media, but less and less, and I can deal with that. And you've got to be realistic. Like our food, our clothes, there were emissions associated. You know, even our breakfast, that producing that food released some emissions. So you just can't even move for creating some emissions. So it's unrealistic to expect none.
I do think, though, Carbon Shadow is an incredible superhero name that you should absolutely adopt and start, and you'll get an outfit made. And I think, you know, start using that introduce that at the Kendall Mountain Festival.
Great Oasis song as well. You know, one of the B-sides.
What about the cost? What about the cost of it? Because you know, you say you're taking a train a lot more than driving. Like, are the costs similar? Like, are the costs much higher?
Well,
what's the reality of that?
That's another great question. So the first time I sort of did a journey like that was UTMB last year, and yeah, I got the train out. It was twice the price of flying. I think it's about 400 quid versus door to door. It was only a little bit longer in time, an hour or two longer, but it was twice the cost. So you thought that's a middle-class luxury. Like me having a conscience is a middle-class luxury. That's not accessible to everyone. I would say trains, what I tend to find if you book them reasonably far in advance in Britain, if they turn up, then it can be affordable. But we don't always book things 4 weeks in advance, do we? But I'm finding trains reasonable, and especially if you book like off peak. But again, that's not always available to people. I got flexible work hours, so yeah, it's not easy and not fair. And that's one of the massive problems. The public transport is so expensive, and then there are all these cheap flights. Like that's where the government could do so much. Yeah. But again, there's a lack of political will. Although I would say, car sharing, carpooling is actually, I mentioned before, I think 4 people in the car is often the same emissions as a train journey. So if you can get together with some mates or the Facebook group on a race Facebook group, that is actually pretty good. Even 3 in a car is pretty good.
David is a big fan of carpooling. David is the expert at carpooling.
I'll let anyone drive me somewhere. I'm happy. If someone wants to be my chauffeur,
being chauffeur driven, that's a little bit
in my stretch limo. And do you know because there's an element of runners like yourself, Jasmine, your Kilians, where by your race participation, you're encouraging others to run, and others to run trail in particular. And do you know if there's a link between if people run trail more, that they actually become closer to kind of the environment, they get more in touch with the earth as such, and become more aware of things like carbon emissions? Do you know if that is a factor as well? Because actually, that's something to bear in mind too, if it is the case.
Yeah, no, I did find a study showing that basically if you're, I mean, it sort of sounds logical to us, but often we need we need some sort of study to prove it. But yeah, there is a study saying people are outdoors more, care about the environment more. So I think that's one of those things that almost it was easy to forget, and I remembered at the end of the book was like, yeah, running's good because we're inspiring people to get outdoors, and we forget like how magical running is in terms of so many people overcoming mental health issues, for example. Running does so much good, and really we can do running with a little footprint. If we don't travel that much, or at least don't fly much, look after our kit, then some of us aren't causing much problem. And quite a few of my mates, when I started telling them stuff, was like, well, I've had these shorts 10 years, and it's like, oh, actually, fair enough, and then, it might be because they're just really stingy. But like stingy is good for the planet. So yeah, I came out actually feeling very positive about running. It's not the worst the worst sport in the world by any means. I was still surprised by how bad it could be, but especially with the clothing and shoes. But yeah, really, I think running is a force for good, undeniably, and can really push on as well, and show other sports how it's done, and show other parts of the world how it's done. I think, or I hope.
Well, if people want it, because we've got a few questions that I know Jody has seen as well from Instagram. But if people want to buy the book, what's the best way for them to do it that gets you the most money from each sale?
Yeah, if you just write a check for £1 million, pop it through my letterbox. I think it's Adventure Books. Yeah. I think it's adventurebooks.co.uk. If I've got that wrong, it's just Vertebrate Publishing. If you go to their website, an order from them, they get more money, and we get, and I think I get a tiny bit more. But yeah, otherwise soon it goes onto Amazon, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but they get more of it. But yeah, I mean, this book it's not about money for me. You don't really make money from books. It's more about spreading the message, man.
Well, we've got a few questions from Instagram. So actually, it's a lot of it is tea related, as you'd imagine, or why you say
now that I've been
why you answered the phone to Meza Run saying hello, you coffee drinking scum.
I think that's perfectly apparent why. He is he is an athlete of mine and a friend, but he drinks coffee, and he's got no future really as a runner because of that.
Is there a larger carbon footprint from coffee than tea?
Yes,
there is. To what scale?
Massive. I don't.
Let's just leave it at that. That'll do. Yeah.
So we've got a question.
Coffee is evil.
We got a question from Kevin, which is, what was your favourite race?
I've definitely had obsessions with the Spine race and UTMB. Another British race I love is the Highland Fling, which I've only done once. I must say, though, my most recent race, at risk of sounding like a musician, my last album is The Best Honest. Tour de Géant, which I did only a few weeks ago. I really loved it and can't wait to go back.
You tempted to go to the what's the longer one, Stephanie Case?
Oh, the Glaciers. I think I am, but not. I want to do the tour again first, and then maybe try that. Yeah, that's like people are out for a week on that one.
Then which DNF sucked the most? I mean, that's quite an egg, isn't it? He's really rubbing in this.
Yeah. Which one of your many?
Which one of the million? You can remember them.
What a rasp! Who asked that one?
That's Kev again. He's the number one fan, apparently.
Well, yeah, my first, so I went sort of 9 years and I think 48 races without a DNF, and then I've had 3 in the last year. So it was probably my first one at UTMB last year, because that was a mental fail. Whereas my next DNF at the Spine race was a physical fail. I very much wanted to continue, I was winning the race by 4 hours. Even the weather was fantastic. Everything was going great, except my groin let me down, not for the first time in my life. So yeah, that UTMB one is frustrating because, like, mentally, I think I was underfueled and I just lost all interest in continuing, but there was no real reason. So I was quite surprised that could happen. And yeah, I guess my third one, if it counts as DNF, was I went for the Penang record, and it was clear it wasn't going to happen. So I wasn't interested in running another 40 miles for the sake of it when I'd done that before. So that one stung, but stung just because I wasn't going to get the record. I didn't really care about stopping.
Would you say has it helped you in the UTMB one? We learn from our mistakes, yada yada yada. Has it actually helped you with your future runs, or has it just created more doubt?
No, I think it has, because I went over it. I went over my nutrition really acutely to see how much I'd put in, and I was chronically underfueled. I'd really not put enough in, really depleted. And I chatted to Josie Perry, a sports psychologist. I was just interested. What could I learn from this? And she explained that sort of, if you're underfueled, the chimp part of your brain is much more likely to take over, and that's more emotive and more sort of fight or flight, and that talks you, it can talk you out. I think it was like it can talk you out of doing something that conflicts with your identity or something. So I think that was how it was explained. But basically that has more power in your mind. So by underfueling, I was more likely to stop, basically, which I guess most of us would know anyway, but it was quite interesting to look at. And also I think, there was a danger. I was, that was the 5th time I was doing that race. I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but I'd lost, you lose some excitement for it, I think. It was still exciting being there, but the idea
is less approved.
Yeah. And I completed it 4 times. I know I could have done it again. It just really wasn't appealing. So I think it was a good time to take a break from that race because it was exciting me less and less, I suppose. So that.
And you think, Jason, would Josie be a good guest, do you think? We've never really had a running psychologist on.
I think so. Yeah, she's got a couple of, at least a couple of really good books, actually. She's really good. I think a bit like Renee McGregor. She's really good. You know, it all starts with a science base, but she's really good at explaining it in fairly simple terms for people like me with little brains. So she's got, there's one really good book. I think it's called Performance something, but there's a new one out just here called The 10 Pillars of Success, which is just like different strategies and tactics. And she is a runner, so
I wish it was the 1 pillar of success. I could handle that.
Yes, the half pillar of success. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I know we're going to be speaking to you at the running show in more detail about this and other stories and things.
Again, we've got to go
there. I know.
I need to get my tea drinking game before that.
How about this? I'm going to buy you a big mug by the run show, so we can have a big mug together.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
From China. Yes. Shipped from China. Yeah.
And if there's one kind of last message, one last thing you'd ask our listeners to do, what would it be?
Oh, blimey. You've totally thrown me. I don't know. Listen to this amazing podcast all the time. I guess it'd be terrible. Drink tea and your life will be better. I
agree.
I agree. That's true.
Cheers to that. Well, thank you so much, Damo. An absolute pleasure as ever. And if you're in London, give me a shout and we can go for a run. And if not, I'll see you up in Birmingham.
Absolutely. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Damo.
Fuck you, buddy.